Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'm going to show you the grand finale of the first FIDE Grand Prix tournament. So this is the tiebreak between Hikaru Nakamura and Levon Aronian. Two rapid play games, 15 minutes on the clock plus 10 seconds per move. And this would decide the winner. And there's a lot riding on this, actually. More on that later. And stick around because these games were so tense. So Nakamura with white in this position. This is the first game. We join after 45 moves. And, well, it's a rook and pawn endgame. They're really tricky. Looks like it should be a draw. If rook takes pawn, then rook takes pawn. It's fizzling out. But king e4 sets black a bit of a problem. If the rook moves away, then you can take this pawn. Aronian played the rook back to d8, trying to keep the king cut off, but that was a mistake. He should have played rook h3. I mean, it's tricky because now white is threatening to take here, but actually what black does is check the king to a poor position and then gets enough counterplay with this pawn. It's quite difficult, even this position, but black should draw. But instead, Aronian played the rook back to d8. And after this move, now Nakamura had a winning position. Could he polish the game off? Let's take a look. See, the difference here is that black doesn't have the same counterplay as that line I showed. Nevertheless, it's still a tricky position. The king would like to come across to support these pawns advancing, so rook d3. Of course, the king and pawn endgame is just a win for white. f5, so Aronian tries to get some counterplay. Rook e3 check. King f6, the king wants to support this pawn. Rook e8. If you want to stop a passed pawn, usually the best place for that rook is behind the pawn. f4. And here I think Nakamura should just go for it with king c5. And it turns into a bit of a race, but I think white should win. Instead, rook b8. So that's kind of hesitating a little bit, but still should be good for white, but now it's tricky. f3, serious counterplay. And here Nakamura makes a mistake. He should check. And then king e4 is a beautiful move. Just coming back the other way to try and snap this pawn. For example, here, this is a win because the king is cut off. And this one should go through with the help of the king. Or rook e1 check. That drives the king away, but it drives the king closer to these pawns. Should be winning for white. But instead Nakamura played king here straight away. And that's a mistake. I think the simplest way to draw is just to bring the king back. And if king takes pawn, rook b3 will take, well, certainly one of these pawns anyway, and the king is close enough to draw. But rook b3 straight away, and this is tricky. King c2. And here, well, now it's Aronian's turn to make a mistake. He should play rook a3, and this, well, should be a draw. It's very difficult, but this is the only move. Rook takes pawn. Oh, well, that wins the rook. And, well, white even has to be careful to draw that. And if rook here, the pawn advances. And, well, that's going to be a draw. But yeah, some very difficult moves there. I mean, rook a3 doesn't feel like it's going to draw, but it's good enough. Instead, Aronian played f2. So it's threatening to bake a queen. Rook f8. Rook takes pawn on f2. And now this is a very straightforward win. In fact, Aronian played rook c5 and actually lost on time in this position. But let's just see how white would finish off the game. So basically the king is going to support the pawn. You can try to put up a fight like this and check the king, but the king steps forward. Remember, white is always threatening to push the pawn, and then the king will support it. Here, here, rook check, and now king a6. That's the key move. And when the rook comes back, the rook swings over. This is very well known technique in this endgame. Supports the pawn. Now the king now is free to come back, but it's too late, because the king comes in and the pawn is going to go through. So in this position, yeah, as I said, Aronian lost on time, but in a completely lost position. So first game went to Hikaru Nakamura. That meant Levon Aronian was in a must-win situation going into game 2. If he could win this, they would go to blitz games. So could Aronian win this one? Let's take a look. But wow, I mean, that rook and pawn endgame was so tense. You know, both players were down to their final seconds. And yeah, they traded blunders, but Nakamura got there in the end. So it's a gioco piano. And here the normal move is just to play d3 to support this pawn. Instead, Aronian played rook e1. Now I think actually the best move for black is just to attack that pawn, and the rook has to go back and they repeat the position, and then white will probably go back to d3, and rook e2 just looks, whoops, not rook e3, but rook e2 to defend this just looks too ungainly. I don't like that at all. So I think, yeah, knight g4 would just repeat the position, but d6 played by Nakamura, and now the difference is between other lines of the gioco piano that white hasn't had to move the pawn to d3, but gets in d4 in one move. So Aronian, I think, managed to kind of move order Nakamura, just sort of trick him into, yeah, playing a little bit inaccurately. And well, I think this is a very typical position, of course, but with these pawns here and these pawns here. But it feels slightly better for white anyway. Just a little trick. If knight takes pawn, then d5 will win a piece. You can see after bishop here, 2 pieces are attacked. So h6. Because the rook wants to move here without allowing knight g5. Bishop b3. Rook e8. Knight d2. Bishop d7. And now it's getting to the point where black is very close to be able to take here and take on e4. So Aronian plays queen b1 to make sure the e-pawn is defended. So it's this very tense situation, and neither side wants to release the tension for the moment. Queen e7. So although Nakamura has slightly less space, his position is very solid. So this little maneuver was just to connect the rooks. Rooks like to work together. Queen d3, b5. So Nakamura trying to set up some counterplay here. And here Aronian plays, I think, a kind of routine move. He moves his rook over. But I think it would have been better to withdraw the bishop to either a2 or c2. Let's just show why. Because in this position, when black plays knight a5, then that can be driven away. But in the game, what happened was rook c1, knight a5, of course, threatens to take the bishop. This bishop is certainly better than this knight. So the bishop has to move away. And now black has time to get in c5. And here I think Nakamura is close to balancing the position. You know, he's managed to get counterplay and hit white center. So now black is ready to play c4, and that's a nice setup for black, actually. So that's why b3 was played, and you can see that's not really the move that white wants to play, as it blocks this. Nevertheless, white still has a little space advantage, but now there's sort of so much pressure on this pawn, all these pieces looking at d4, that really it's time to do something about that. Now, of course, you could exchange here, but I can't believe that is problematic for black at all. I mean, white has lost his space advantage. The rook comes to the middle, looks absolutely fine. So Aronian kept his space advantage by pushing the pawn, but once the centre is locked like this, then it's easier to determine strategy, I suppose, for both sides, but basically it gives black some security. So Nakamura finds time to switch the knight to the king side, and so there's always the possibility to throw that knight into f4. And it just feels as though black has enough counterplay here, even though Aronian is trying to stir things up using this space advantage, trying to get things going on the queen side. Even so, I think, you know, Nakamura has placed his pieces so harmoniously, they connect very well, that it's hard to imagine that this is a serious space advantage for white. It's hard to use it when black is so well coordinated. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's do that. Queen a3. Nevertheless, Aronian is trying. Queen d8, the queen switches over. Bishop f1, so that's perhaps making room for this knight. Bishop b5, and also clearing the c-file for the rook. And here I was a little bit surprised that Aronian went for a queen exchange. Remember, he's in a must-win situation. I would have thought he'd play maybe knight b3 or knight c4 and just try to play this position. But he went for queen exchange. Bishop takes, more pieces being exchanged. King takes. Rook here. But, I mean, I think he's basically seen that he has a chance still perhaps to get a rook to c6. Or maybe if he can get a knight to c6, I mean, that's a wonderful outpost. That's his hope. Then he still could have some chance to win the game. Rook b5, but Nakamura is organising pressure on this pawn. So that's why the knight switches over in order to come here. But now, so Nakamura has potential pressure here. You could even go a5 immediately. But I think he now makes a really good practical decision. He plays his knight back to e8, and the whole point is to unleash this f-pawn, putting pressure on the e-pawn, and that will undermine the support for the pawn on d5. So knight d3, f5. And this is a very hard position for white to control. So there's pressure, even though Aronian has a space advantage and perhaps potential to get the advantage. In fact, he's under pressure here on the queen side and now in the centre as well. So if that pawn is taken, then the knight comes back, and you can see that black is going to recover the pawn. So that's why f3 was played to support this. Pawn takes e4, pawn takes e4. And now, again, a very interesting decision from Nakamura. He's basically trying to destabilize white. If white has time, then perhaps, as I mentioned before, this knight might swing into c6, or perhaps the rook would come down to c6. But knight f4 just destabilizes white, because, I mean, white I don't think has much better than to exchange, but getting rid of that knight means that this pawn doesn't have the same protection. But the position is a little bit unbalanced on the king side. Rook b8, doubling, attacking this one. Rook b1, defending. Knight f6. And so Nakamura has spied something else. Now that this exchange has taken place, then there's potential to attack this pawn. King f3 attacks here. G5. Knight c4. Okay, we're reaching boiling point now. The knight attacks this pawn. This knight comes back. Now, how should white play? It's really difficult, actually. It's very difficult to increase the pressure. If, let's say, knight a5, then the knight will come back here. Knight c6, rook e8. And although that's the dream square for the knight, in fact, now that black is attacking that pawn, white is in trouble. So instead of that, Aronian decided to play h4, trying to maybe weaken this pawn, perhaps bring the king in. Rook c8, pushing that knight away. So it's funny, Nakamura decides to drive the knight to supposedly where it wants to go, but he comes back to put some pressure here. Pawn takes g5, pawn takes g5, knight c6 and rook e8. And this is really problematic. How does white defend that pawn? It's too late to defend it, actually. If rook e1, well, that does defend it, but now rook takes d5. There's a pin, you see. So Aronian played knight d4, attacking the rook. And now Nakamura was really alert. g4 check. And rook takes pawn check. King came up, rook takes d4, king takes f6, and rook d takes d5. So with that little flurry of exchanges, then Nakamura is now actually a pawn up. Remember, he just needs a draw to win the tiebreak, to win the tournament. So he's in a very sound position. The king is it a strength or is it a weakness? If Aronian could somehow bring a rook down here, then, well, white could be attacking. But he had to play rook f1 first to stop a check. Rook h5, now that creates a little bit of checking distance. So it's actually a really difficult position for Aronian. And once again, he was short of time. It's not an easy one for both players. And here he actually makes a mistake. I mean, the best he can hope for is a draw here. But I'm afraid this one was fatal. Rook h6 check, king e7. I think we've seen this before. It's the dreaded laser beam checkmate or the double barrel shotgun checkmate. The king just is in terrible trouble if there's a check on the back rank, or here it's checkmate, or the lawnmower checkmate, some people say. Okay, what's the final move for black? After this move, Aronian resigned. What did Hikaru Nakamura play? He went rook h8. Beautiful final move. If, let's say, rook takes pawn check, king h7, check, and that's checkmate. And if rook e3, attempting to block, check with the king again. Rook e8 interposes, rook b8, and rook takes rook. Black is a rook up and wins. So wonderful final move from Hikaru Nakamura, who wins the tournament. Now, what does that mean? So this is the first of 3 Grand Prix tournaments. Let me just check out. There we are. Let's get the standings. The first of 3 Grand Prix tournaments. All the players will play just 2 tournaments. So this win really sets up Nakamura. He gets 13 points for winning the tournament. Aronian gets 10. So both of them are in a strong position. They still have 1 tournament to play. but obviously Nakamura in an excellent position. There's going to be another Grand Prix tournament in Belgrade in a couple of weeks' time. And then there'll be a third Grand Prix tournament in Berlin after that. And Nakamura and Aronian will both be playing in the third tournament. But let's see what happens in Belgrade. But Hikaru Nakamura has put himself in a very strong position. Remember, the real prize is the two top scorers in the Grand Prix will qualify for the candidates tournament. And this is a fantastic result for Nakamura. It's his first, these are his first classical games that he's played in over 2 years. So a fantastic comeback. He's proved that he's a tough competitor. He said he felt much more relaxed when playing, much more relaxed when he got into bad positions. He has been playing, of course, loads of online chess, lots of streaming, and that came across in his play. Actually, he defended really tenaciously, and, well, in rapid play, as we've seen, he proved that he can deliver the goods. So, there we go. Hope you enjoyed that. Another video will be coming your way in a few days' time. Thanks for watching.